Hello, welcome back. Mrs. Johnston here, and it is knowledge and social studies time. Remember, we are working in Unit 10 on colonial towns and townspeople, and we are on Lesson 3 today, the bread makers, millers, and bakers. Let's look back at the Venn diagram that was created in Lesson 1 and compare and contrast colonial times to today. So here is our Venn diagram. Colonial times is on this side. Today is on this side. And the items that were same are in the middle. So we know that during both time periods they had food, heat, light, and clothes. But how they were different was during colonial times, their light was done with candles. Their heat was produced by a fire in a fireplace or a hearth. Their clothes were homemade. They were made from cotton, from a cotton field that was picked, or from a wool that was sheared or cut off a sheep. And their food came from crops and animals that were on their farms. Today, our heat comes from a furnace, which is gas that is brought in from outdoors inside your home. Our food comes from a store, such as Walmart or Meijer. Clothing also comes from stores such as Walmart or Meijer or Target, Kohl's, depending on where you're at. And our light comes from electricity, which is also brought in from our home. Remember that a farmer could not always make everything that they needed. So the farmer would go into town to exchange goods. He would take crops, food items, or other things from his farm and take them into town and barter or exchange for other items he needed, such as clothing, horseshoes, candles, flour, and other items that were made by a tradesperson. What is it called when goods are traded or exchanged for other goods? It is called bartering. Can you name some items a farmer might take with him to sell in town? A farmer might take eggs, milk, cheese, and livestock in order to sell in town. What kind of tradespeople might a farmer visit in town? A farmer might visit a baker, blacksmith, miller, tailor, and hatter. Today's Read Aloud is about bakers or people who bake bread. Can you tell me about what kind of breads you like to eat? Mrs. Johnston's favorite type of bread to eat are ones that look like this. They're baguettes. They have a hard outer crust and then a moist, soft inside. And when they're warm and you put just a little bit of butter on them, they are just perfect. Those are my favorite kind. You may eat homemade bread at home, but most people today buy their bread at a store. Bread can come sliced, and they can also come unsliced. Can you identify the main ingredient of bread? What is the main thing to make bread that you need? Flour is the main ingredient in bread. Do you remember where flour comes from? Flour comes from wheat, corn, and other grains. Remember, in the first read aloud, you heard how bread was made at home in the country by the farmer's wife. Making bread at home in colonial times took a lot of time. The wheat was planted and harvested, ground into flour, mixed with yeast and water, and baked in an iron pot over the hearth. Have you ever helped to make bread? Some of you said yes, but others said no. So, this lesson, for those of you who said no, will tell you exactly how bread is made. What is the main ingredient in bread? Flour. That is correct. Does the bread making process take a long time? Yes. What is the name of the tradesperson who makes bread? That is correct. A baker. Today you will learn about two tradespeople, the miller and the baker, who helped with different steps in the process of making bread. Listen to find out more about how bread was made in colonial times. All over the world, for thousands of years, bread has been an important part of many people's diets. In almost every culture, people make bread or foods like bread. In Mexico, they eat tortillas. In India, they eat chapati. In Israel, they eat matzo. And in America, we eat any of the above, plus bagels, muffins, biscuits, and sliced bread. What's your favorite type of bread? That is very interesting. I enjoy hearing your type of favorite bread. In colonial times, most breads were made from wheat or corn. Where did the wheat and corn come from? That's right, the farmer. But it was a long process from the farmer's field to the baker's shop. Today, we're going to learn about what and who was involved with the making of bread. Whom do you predict we'll read about that helps make bread? I bet many of you said the baker. First, the farmer planted his crops of wheat and corn. Then he harvested them or picked them when they were fully grown. Next, the farmer had to separate out the seeds or grains from the plant. Then the seeds had to be ground into flour. A long time ago, people used to grind their own wheat, grains, or corn kernels with big stones called grindstones. Early grindstones, used by native people all over the world, were like the ones in this picture. One stone was larger and either flat or bowl shaped, and the other stone was usually small enough to be held in the hand. The person grinding would spread some grains on the larger stone and grind them with the smaller stone. Imagine grinding two stones together all day long just to get enough flour to make one loaf of bread. It was hard work. Eventually, people found a quicker way to do the job. Introducing the mill. Mills existed in Europe long before people settled in America. A mill is a building with machinery that grinds grain into flour. A mill did the same thing as a person with a grindstone. It crushed the grains of wheat between two stones. The stones in a mill were called millstones, and they were very, very large. Far too large for a person to lift. Instead of a person grinding the stones together, a giant machine grinds the heavy millstones in a mill together. The bigger the millstones, the more grain the mill could crush into flour. Water mills were the most common type of mills in early America. They were built right on the rivers. The fast flowing water made the big wheel turn around. The wheel was connected to the gears that made the millstones inside the building turn. The heavy weight of the stones pressed hard to grind the grains. The tradesperson in charge of the mill was called a miller. The miller would charge farmers money or some of their grains to grind their wheat or corn into flour. Then collect the flour into bags. A miller with a water mill could grind and bag more flour in one day than a farmer with a grindstone could grind in weeks. Once the flour was ground, the miller sold some of it to the baker. The baker made bread, muffins, and cakes out of the flour he got from the miller. To make dough, the baker mixed a lot of flour with a little bit of water and a little bit of salt. He also added a special ingredient called yeast. The yeast made the bread puff up and rise when it was baked. Next, the baker kneaded the dough or mixed it together with his hands. Kneading dough is like pressing and stretching the dough together lots of different ways to make sure that the ingredients are all evenly mixed and the dough has the right consistency or thickness, firmness, or stickiness or texture. Certain kinds of bread had to be kneaded for a long time before the dough was ready to be baked. Have you ever kneaded bread dough or Play-Doh with your hands? Next, the baker shaped the dough, either by patting it with his hands or rolling it with a rolling pin. Then it was time to put the bread into the oven. In the old days, ovens were brick or stone structures with a fire inside. When the bread was just the right shade of brown, the baker took it out of the oven and let it cool for a while. Mmm, can't you just smell that wonderful aroma? That's freshly baked, warm bread, ready to eat. Bread is still made today in more or less the same way it was made in early America 300 years ago. The first step is making the dough. Bakers have to get up extra early, sometimes at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, to start making dough and start baking bread for their first customers. Customers exchange goods with the baker or give the baker money to buy what she or he has made. Even today, in many parts of the world, hungry customers stand outside the bakery door first thing in the morning to buy their bread and other breakfast treats. There is nothing better than fresh baked goodies to start your day. What is the main topic of the Read Aloud? The main topic is how bread was made in colonial times. From which plants is flour made? Flour is made from corn, wheat, and other grains. How does a miller make flour? The miller grinds grain between two grindstones. Besides a loaf of bread, what other foods are made with flour? Cakes, rolls, tortillas, matzah. What is a mill? A mill is a building with equipment used to grind wheat or corn into flour. How does a water mill work? A water wheel turns the millstones, which grind the grains into flour. What ingredients are in dough? Dough is made of flour, water, yeast, and sometimes salt. Explain how a baker makes bread. He mixes together flour with water and yeast, kneads it, lets it rise, and puts it in the oven. What is the word used for mixing the dough by hand? Did you say kneading? Why is yeast important? It makes the dough rise and have the right consistency for bread. Mrs. Johnston hopes you enjoyed our story on the bread makers, the millers, and the bakers.